It's time to look at which were the best PvP classes and specs on Legion on the last patch 7.3.5. I played Legion in 2016 to 2018. I didn't play it on retail ever. I always played it on Firestorm primarily, but I also played a little bit of it on Freaks when it launched there. So my experience comes mainly from playing on Firestorm. But Legion launched on Firestorm like few weeks after it launched on retail. So every major patch we had on Firestorm when they had it on retail pretty much. So I went through all the major patches and there were some really big changes to the classes and specs and how they performed. So I'm trying to think back and think about how it was on the latest patch. But it's also been a long time, and since then I haven't really played much Legion other than like 1v1 raided and skirmishes on Firestorm's Greymane, so my memory is not the best anymore, but I'll try my best. I also try to refresh my memory watching some of the YouTube videos from back then, and there are some really good ones I recommend you to watch. I'll put them in the video description. This will be all the classes we go through, literally every single class and spec, DPS, tanks, and healers. I'm not going to go very in-depth into any classes. I will say what's special about them and kind of how they work. And I reached some 2200 to 2300 rating in 2v2 playing double DPS comp, and I think that made us like rank 1 or rank 2 double DPS because literally nobody else played it almost, especially not on high ratings. I think there was one more team, and I think they played Demon Hunter, Havoc Demon Hunter with a Subtlety Rogue, and I think they were above us. I played Assassination Rogue, he played Retribution Paladin, and I also got to some 2200 rating playing a Retribution Paladin with my partner Fury and Arms Warrior, and also playing Retribution Paladin with a Subtlety Rogue. So I did pretty well in double DPS comps. I've never really played much of 3v3 other than just once in a while, because 3v3s on Firestorm were mostly dead as on any other private servers, as well as rated BGs, pretty much a dead bracket too. So 2v2 is where it's at for private servers, but I'll also be talking about what I saw from players on retail, how they did over there. Starting off with the Warriors. Arms Warrior, always a solid pick on every single expansion. If you like playing with a healer on your back, Arms Warrior is a decent choice. And this time Fury spec is actually viable. So that makes Arms kind of lackluster, since 50% of the Warriors will probably choose between Fury and Arms. Decent in any arena bracket, 2v2 and 3v3 with enhancement shamans, super popular. Deserves to be an A tier. Fury Warriors are probably the best they've ever been on Legion. I don't think Fury has ever been as popular and as viable as on Legion. I don't think it's ever happened before. They can literally one-shot people every 45 seconds. So Fury, honestly, as good as it is with burst, it's not so good with sustained DPS, but has also really good healing and pretty much the same crowd control as Arms, which is also pretty decent crowd control. I would honestly put it even in S tier. I think it's that good. Prod Warrior. Legion is one of the few expansions where tank specs are viable in PvP, and Prod Warriors are one of the worst for their enemies. So they're one of the best specs on Legion. They can like intervene to their partner and make him pretty much unkillable for a couple seconds, mitigating so much damage. So Prot Warrior in an enemy team makes sure that nobody from his team dies. And it's got pretty solid damage too, and solid healing with Last Stand. I would honestly, in 3v3 especially, I would put Prod Warriors in S tier. They're decent for RBGs, and they're not really that useful for 2v2. So I would say overall it's like A tier. Retribution Paladin are really good on Legion. My personal favorite class. I spent countless hours playing Retribution on Legion, and I love that spec. It's got really good healing. It doesn't have as much of a healing and support for his partners, but also packs Blessing of Sanctuary to freedom partners from crowd control. It also lacks mobility as always, but this time Retribution Paladins actually have a snare. They can Blade of Justice to apply Hand of Hindrance for 3 seconds, which is a huge help. But also if targeted by the enemy, especially in 3v3, Reds outside of Shield of Vengeance and Bubble are really, really squishy. Probably still put them in S tier, but like at the end of S tier. Like between S and A tier, but I think still they deserve S tier because they can still be played in like double DPS comps even, so that's super impressive. Protection Warriors are 100% a viable PvP spec, especially in 3v3, as most of the other tanking specs pretty good for RBGs. I would say it's extremely comparable to the Prot Warrior. You can also apply immunity for spell damage. It obviously has all the bubbles and all this kind of stuff, so it can be a really, really good supporter for your team. I would say overall it's extremely comparable to Prot Warriors, and that's why I would put it in the same tier. Holy Paladin is great, and so is every single other healing spec on Legion. Like, healers can almost do the same amount of damage as DPS specs can do, which is kind of unfair because they also have busted healing. Holy Paladin can also go offensive. You can spec into, I think it's Holy Avenger, and you can do insane damage. I don't think it's super impressive. I think there are better healers on the expansion, but if you're playing a healer in PvP on Legion, you can't be worse than A tier, honestly, and that's where I would put the Holy Paladins. Unholy DKs, I'd honestly consider them one of the most overpowered classes. They're extremely good for 1v1, and they really excel in every single bracket. They have endless defensives, Icebound, AMS, Anti-Magic Zone, lackluster in terms of mobility, but they have some gap closers, Death Grip, Pet Leap, Crazy Burst with Apocalypse, your artifact ability, and even really good sustained damage and especially sustained pressure against healers with Necrotic Strike. This is the clearest S tier there can be. Unholy Death Knights are busted. Frost Death Knights were really good for a period of time on Legion. They're still solid. They have a lot of burst with Pillar of Frost. They can even do solid damage on range. They're even less mobile than Unholy Death Knights. They're just super squishy. Literally on every single expansion, Frost Death Knights are squishy. They can heal a lot. If you pair up your Icebound Fortitude with your Death Strikes, you heal for a ton. You can literally top yourself from 0 to 100 Death Striking. But if people see Icebound Fortitude active on you, they will kite you, they will use their disarms, their evasions, and they will prevent that healing on higher MMRs. So they're super easily countered. Decent class still, but it's not better than B tier. Blood Death Knights, I don't really remember them being played on Legion. It's a solid spec, but I don't think it has enough damage. It doesn't really provide much of a support to its partners. It's not really special compared to any tank or DPS spec. I don't really see a point in playing Blood Death Knights. And as I said, I don't really remember them being played. I would put them in the lowest tier, which is C tier. Moving on to the first range DPS class, which is Hunter. Hunters are the kings of battlegrounds as always. Marksmanship is even more so sniper than it ever was. Still packing that amazing crowd control, a lot of burst. Marksmanship would be a solid A tier. Beast Mastery is so annoying. Finding Beast Mastery, literally the only thing they have to do is just let their pets go and they can line of sight themselves. They will never die and their pets will do insane damage. I don't think Beast Mastery Hunter pets have ever done as much damage as they do now on Legion. It's literally unfair. If you're fighting 1v1 against a class like called Warlock that has no mobility, you just send your pets and you line of sight the entire arena. And the pets will kill it like nothing. It's so annoying, I would probably even put it in S tier. Just for how annoying this spec is. Survival Hunters got extremely busted on the latest patch of Legion. I think this is the first time they've been reworked into a melee spec, and they started to be played with healers because they actually can put so much pressure on the enemy healer that they're able to kill them. Paired up with the incredible crowd control, I think Survival Hunter is S tier. Enhancement Shamans, really good. My first ever video that blew up was called Enhancement Shamans Are Overpowered on Legion. It was because they literally one-shot people. They pop their burst and they one-shot. Plus, if you're playing on a lower MMR, you pop your Counter-Strike totem, people don't know what it does, and they just kill themselves, which is also pretty funny. I did that quite a few times when I didn't know when I was new to the expansion. Solid off healing still. I'm thinking whether I should put it in S or A. I think I'd put it in A. Yeah, I think A is more fair. Elemental Shaman, really good for 3v3. I haven't really seen it in 2v2, I don't think. Not really much. It's a really good spec, but I haven't seen too many people play it. It may be really good for 3v3 and rated BGs, but in 2v2, which is the most important bracket for private servers, it's just kind of lackluster to me. Let's put it in B tier. Resto Shamans, dude. One word, Earth Shield. Wait, is that 2 words? Well, either way, that video of Sidu just going AFK, applying his Earth Shield, and he would never die, that alone puts it in S tier. Resto Shamans are so bulky. And we have Subtlety Rogues. Subtlety Rogues on every single expansion are a guaranteed A tier at least. However, on this expansion, they aren't really special. You still want to play them with like setup comps with mages, 3v3, 2v2, 1v1s, even BGs for ninja capping as always. Subtlety really solid choice, but this time we have Assassination and Combat, which are both also viable. I'll put Subtlety in A tier, although it could also be S tier. Assassination is the spec to play on Legion. It does insane damage, has insane pressure. It can literally solo healers and is played with healers a lot. And you would see a ton of Assassination Rogues played on Legion because this spec is so fucking good. And it's good to see, for once, Assassination being viable in PvP. S tier, clear as day. Outlaw Rogue was reworked on Legion, and it's a lot of fun. It's way simpler than the other Rogue specs, but 100% viable. It's got all that crowd control. One of its downsides is that it's super RNG. You literally roll a dice for what kind of buffs you get. And if you fail a roll, you kind of fail the arena. You can literally roll 6 and get all the best buffs. Or you can just roll 1 and you're fucked up because you just wasted all your combo points on roll, which kind of failed. You could also go for slice and dice instead and have like a solid damage improvement, but you wouldn't have that chance of rolling really high number and getting super crazy buffs. So there's that option. I think Outlaw is a really, really solid choice, but I don't think it's anywhere near Assassination. But I'd say it's somewhat comparable to Subtlety. Maybe a little bit lower, but I think it deserves A tier still. Feral Druids, much like Unholy Death Knights, one of the most overpowered classes on Legion overall. It's got incredible self-healing, it's got incredible support, unreal mobility. One of the 2 most mobile classes is Druids and Monks, obviously. Insane burst, insane damage. If you don't know what to play and you just want to destroy people, just go Feral Druid, it's so busted. S tier. Guardian Druid, pretty good for defending flags. If you want a long games, I wouldn't recommend it in Arena at all. I think it's one of the weakest tank specs even. Compared to like Blood Death Knight, honestly, I just wouldn't play Guardian in PvP. Don't waste your time. Balance Druid, pretty solid. Not amazing though. Especially if you compare it to Feral, like what's the point in playing Balance? Come on. It's kind of squishy, not amazing DPS. Crowd control is decent. Very comparable to Elemental Shaman, and I think that's the tier that Balance Druid deserves, is the B tier. Resto Druids are probably the best healing spec, or one of the 2 best healing specs. They not only heal and crowd control with those cyclones and roots, they also do insane amounts of damage. I remember there was an arena, we were fighting, I think, a Resto Druid with a Frost Mage or something. We killed a Frost Mage. Resto Druid killed us both like it was nothing. Because he was able to heal himself fine and was doing incredibly insane amount of damage. Just unbelievable. I don't know who made up those numbers for the damage of healers, but it's unfair. Resto Druids are S tier. Windwalker Monks, one of the definitely better specs on Legion. Incredible mobility. You're just gonna have so much fun carrying flags or just running away from people. They're kind of squishy, so you kind of have to think about what cooldowns at what specific time you're going to use. so that you don't just die. But they're a lot of fun. They have incredible damage. They have insane burst with cooldowns. They have some of the best 3v3 comps you can play with a Unholy Death Knight, Arcane Mage, for instance. Really, really good pick. Overall, solid in every situation. S tier. Brewmaster Monk, I think it's a solid tank. I don't really remember seeing Brewmaster Monks in PvP, so I don't really know how well they could do. So that's kind of a question mark for me. But if they aren't super played in PvP, that kind of suggests that they are not really that good. So I would put them in C tier, and you let me know if you have any experience with Brewmaster Monks on the latest Legion patch, because I don't. And Mystery Monk, specking Way of the Crane. You can be like hybrid healer and overpowered DPSer. Mystery Monks are so crazy, it's unreal. Like, it's that kind of territory with the Resto Druid. It's so comparable. It's obviously S tier. It's even super hard to interrupt Mystery Monks because they're so mobile and they're usually out of range unless they choose to fight you on melee and do incredible amounts of damage. It's like playing double DPS if you play a Mystery Monk with a DPS in 2v2, but you have overpowered heals. That's how good it is. Now to the newest addition to the class list, which is Demon Hunters. Havoc Demon Hunters. Mobility is amazing. So much fun. They're like a glass cannon. They don't have too many defensives. I guess their mobility kinda counts as defensive. They have a lot of damage and pressure, so they are oftentimes played with healers and very successful in that. They have pretty decent crowd control with Chaos Novas and Eruptions and Imprisons. They can even fly. Dude, they can literally jump in the sky and fly in the arena using rain from above and shooting. Like, what you gonna do about that? You can just jump out of line of sight. That's one of the things you could do, but it's so epic playing Demon Hunters. And obviously gliding in Arathi Basin from Lumber Mill to like Blacksmith. I love that class. I think it deserves to be an S tier. Demon Hunters are not so amazing in 1v1, but I think overall they're still so good in every single situation that they deserve to be an S tier. But it's like between S and A tier. And Demon Hunters also have a tank spec. I'm gonna move my camera a little bit so you can see which class I'm talking about. Vengeance Demon Hunters. Not really too amazing. They're kind of viable in 2v2. You could play them, but where they shine is in Battlegrounds. Dude, the best flag carrier in the game, that's Vengeance Demon Hunters. They can literally jump leap through the entire battleground almost. Like if you have Warsong Gulch, they can do that over and over. It has such a short cooldown. It has so many stacks that you can just repeatedly jump. Nobody can catch up to you because it jumps just so far and so often. Those single 2 abilities I think they have to jump make it the best flag carrier in the game. Plus it's a tank, so it's super bulky. Honestly, just for its usefulness in BGs, it would deserve to be S tier. But it's obviously not as amazing in Arena, but still is viable in the right comp. So I would put it in A tier. I think it deserves it. Affliction Warlock is always really good for multi-target fights. But it's kind of boring. What you gonna play? A rot comp where it's about dampening and playing 10-minute arenas every single time? I mean, it's kind of lame. It's kind of boring. Really comparable to the Elemental and Balance, and especially compared to the other specs, to Destruction and Demonology, which are both busted. I would honestly put Affliction in B tier. I think that's where it deserves to be. Destruction is amazing. One of the most hated PvP specs in the latest patch of Legion. That thing just destroys people. Obviously great crowd control with Fierce alone. That's one of the best crowd control abilities ever in the game. Incredibly easy S tier. They're so good. Their damage is unreal. They're gonna one-shot people like it's nothing. And Demonology Warlocks. If I was talking about Beast Mastery Hunters pets being overpowered and annoying, Demonology Warlock is the same story. Easy S tier. The amount of pets they're gonna summon and the amount of damage Demonology Warlock's gonna do is completely out of this world. I don't like the redesign. I preferred Warlocks on Mist of Pandaria, But hey, they're still overpowered. Plus they're packing a big zoo of pets, so if you're into pets, you can get a Demonology Warlock. Gonna have a ton of them. Second to last class is Mage. Mage is always solid in at least one of its 3 specs. On Legion, it's overpowered in all of its 3 specs. Arcane, with the mobility it has, with blinks or shimmers, teleporting back and forth. It's like, got like 3 or 4 teleport cooldowns. It's unbelievable. You're gonna chase an Arcane Mage, good luck. Good luck with that. Plus they have Insane Burst, Mark of Lunith, incredible damage. Honestly, I think I could put them in S tier. It's obvious that every mage spec still has polymorphs and a bunch of crowd control. None has as much crowd control against melees, you know, all the freezes and slow as Frost Mage. And Frost Mage also has incredibly good damage. Plus you can just damage and snare opponents with just casting Blizzard. Super effective. If you don't know how to counter mages, you're in a big trouble. And if you're any melee class, you're in big trouble anyway, even if you know how to counter mages. So Frost Mage is obvious S tier. Fire Mage is also really good, but it's kind of behind the 2 specs. It's got really good burst. You have Fire Blast, you have Phoenix Flames, which works similarly to Fire Blast, also giving you Hot Streak proc so you can Pyroblast more often, and you can talent for Greater Pyroblast if you want to have those real big setups, and long cast but a big hit Pyroblast. There's that option of playstyle. I love it. You will have to play with something like a Rogue though to pull it off, you know, with the saps and cheap shots and kidney shots, so that the target doesn't line of sight or interrupt you within that long Greater Pyroblast cast. But if you pull it off, it's insane. But as I say, it's nowhere near comparable to Arcane or Frost. Thinking whether I should put it in A or B, I think it's more towards B, honestly. I'm not so impressed with it, but it's still a solid spec. I would put it like in between A and B tier. Let's do it like this. Shadow Priests, obviously still really good. They have that Void Shift, Void Form, whatever it's called, for a big chunk of burst. I'm not too impressed by Shadow Priests. I think they're easily countered with line of sighting and so on. But I still think with their amount of healing they have and all the abilities they're packing to help support their partners, I think they deserve to be an A tier. Disc Priest is really good. Tons of damage as almost any other healing spec. And it's played a lot. I think it's like, I'd say it's like 50-50 between Holy Priest and Disc Priest. I think you're seeing both in Arena. Disc Priest is pretty squishy though. It's one of those few healer specs where you can target them and you know that you can kill that Disc Priest. So I would say it's a tier. And Holy Priest is very similar. Holy Priest is very comparable to Disc, but I don't really remember seeing as many Holy Priests in arenas. They have some really good abilities, but once you know how to counter Holy Priests, then they can't really do too much to you anymore. Still a solid spec, but of all the healer specs, I would still probably put them at the end. But it's a healer, so it's still solid. I'm thinking the end of A tier or the start of B tier. I'm just not too impressed with Holy Priests. I'm gonna put them in B tier. But that's a tough decision. And this is my final World of Warcraft Legion PvP tier list for patch 7.3.5. Honestly, very tough decisions. I'm sure I'm gonna get my memory refreshed real quick once I get to play on Felsong, on Tauri, or on any other Legion server that is coming out. But this, I think this is the way I would see it. You guys let me know your experiences playing the Legion expansion, how you see it, if you agree or disagree. But this is honestly how I feel like about the classes and specs and how I remember them. But I'm also a little bit confused because I've been playing on all those previous patches, and I may remember the class from an earlier patch and thinking it's still good when maybe it was changed and nerfed later on. But honestly, there's not really very many classes you could go wrong with. No matter what spec you choose, whether it's A or S tier, you're not gonna go wrong. All of those are really, really good. And the option of playing not just DPSs, but pretty much every single healer spec, and even tank specs in PvP, mind-boggling. So, PvP on Legion is gonna be a lot of fun, and a lot of annoyance too. I'll see you in Arena.